past 2 UK time. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to the to another webinar of the Addiction and the Family International Network. Today we will hear a talk by Ed Sipler, as I just understood. I always used to pronounce him Sipler, but anyway, now I've already learned the first issue. And he, coming originally from Philadelphia, which was quite astonishing for me, has worked in the health service in Northern Ireland since 1983. So he's a real veteran in the field. And he has qualified in social work in 1990. And currently, he works in the Southeastern Health and Social Care Trust with a strategic lead for reducing alcohol and drug-related harm. And he also works as a clinician in the addiction unit. He's a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers since 2001 already, and has got a passionate interest in supporting family members affected by someone's substance misuse. He has developed several means to reach family members, and also has long-standing collaborations with other AFINet members in adapting and evaluating the 5-step method for young people, Steps to Cope. And he's a trustee of AFINet since 2014. And today he will talk about reaching family members in large numbers, using the internet as a tool to enhance conversations with family members. Just the screen disappeared, which I think is important, at least from 2 points of view. One, of course, the pandemic, which has caused a lot of problems for family members to get support. And on the other hand, I think this has got a real important public health issue, given that we know that far many more people are affected by someone else's substance use problems than we got people addicted to any kinds of behaviors or substances. And given the large health impact addiction problems in the social networks have, I think Ed will probably show us some ideas on how to have a large public health impact by the work we're promoting within AFINet. So I'm very interested to hear what you will tell us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to say to everyone, thanks for joining me today. When we talk about reaching family members, I'm going to be talking about some ideas. I'd like this to be a conversation more than just a dialogue. Now, I did think if the numbers were going to be small, that we would have it more in a conversational style, but there's 16 people. I probably have a lot to talk about, but I'd like to talk for about a half hour, mostly to aim it as a conversation. But during the presentation, I'd like to stop a couple of times and ask you questions, if that's okay. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, I just came along to listen. I don't want to participate. It's up to you what you share. And I hope that's okay. Unfortunately, every time I need to move slides, I'm going to ask Mina to do it. So, Mina, if you could move the next slide, please. Back where we are. I don't want to go on about this, but when we are talking about reaching family members across the world, what if there's an estimate, 100 million people have a problem with alcohol and other drugs across the world, and it affects several people. For each one of those 100 million, you're not just talking a big number, you're talking a colossal number of people. This is huge. Now, where I'm coming from, and sorry for the little map of Northern Ireland in the corner, but I only come from a very small place in the world. And that's why I'm delighted of what AFINet are trying to do to connect us, that we work together. We share, we grow, um, we facilitate each other's learning, that how we can support family members in what we know is a really challenging situation. So, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, now, I'm not going to talk about this in any length. You know this. The experiences of family members is, to say it's stressful is an understatement. The pain people go through, whether it be for children and the unpredictability and the sheer terror that can come from that. How many family members feel alone, that isolation, the blame, and that's not only perceived, but also sometimes imposed, um, but the stress and strain for family members is unprecedented. And when you look at the impact, again, I'm not going to talk about that, but we know how that affects people's both mental health, physical health. Um, and as an article that Jim and Richard, talked about, it's generally a neglected area and of focus in the world. So, if you could move on, please. Now, these webinars are really informative because they get us thinking. And back in March, when Jim Orford talked about seeing the bigger picture, I heard Jim say very specific things. And what I heard him say, and see if you agree with this, and use chat if you want to come in, add to the discussion, or ask questions. But family members are difficult to identify, but if they're not associated with any one health problem, it's right across both physical and mental health. I think this is a big issue. The next one. Family members usually sit quite quiet. You can go back, please. Still stick to this one. They don't create problems. They don't create waves. And if they have no collective voice or identity, and they tend to be neglected in policy and practice, the shame, the guilt is important. But those 2 points, if family members don't have that collective voice or identity, do they have even a name of what they refer themselves to? That's maybe worth asking a couple of questions. If you could move on, please. Now, in AFINet, we had several projects. One of them was how we can reach. The idea of reach family members in larger numbers around the world was the topic of Project One. Now, a couple of years ago, when we asked AFINet members, let's give your thoughts about this, 17 AFINet members from 13 countries responded and were involved in exchanges and ideas. And if any of you were here, and I know, Justine, you're here from Scotland, thank you. And other ones, thank you very much for all your input. I'm hoping we're going to reflect some of your thoughts. If I leave anything out, please do add. But I really want to say thank you because it really got me thinking. So if you can move on, please. Now, we first asked, well, what does it even mean to reach family members? And that created a big discussion. And these were questions. Are we trying to help family members realize they're not alone, that their experience is so common across our populations? Are we helping family members see that they deserve help in their own right? Do we get a better understanding of what are some of the barriers for family members to seek support in their own right? Are we looking at ways we're improving our ability to communicate? But then worldwide, what help, what support is there for family members and how they access that support? And is there something altogether different? So when I looked at that, the responses to Project One, maybe if you can go on the next one, they said yes to all of them. But they also raised a couple of other points well worth thinking about. The relationship of the family member with the person with the alcohol, drug, or gambling problem, well, that can add to the complexity. Are they mother, father, grandparent, neighbor, friend, child? That's going to add a slightly different complexity. Gender may have a part to play, but are there cultural differences? So this all makes it a little bit complex. So if we can move on, please, Mina. Now, one of the respondents, and this came from Scotland, and I thought this is really, really helpful to think about. Core to that family support is a belief that I'm not alone, that other people experience very similar things. And one of the things about, and I'm a big fan of self-compassion. Self-compassion, is begin to teach us Christian Neff's, work is teaching us. A part of it is that common humanity. When we have common struggles, well, that's going to be important. And what I was told in that feedback, without that understanding, family members can remain stuck without hope or motivations to move forward. But there was another interesting point. It's usually when family members, what helps them come to that realization of that how that support can be useful for them. It's only after they've received it. It's not usually a motivator to get them actively involved. It's only when they experience it. So sharing that common experience seems to be vital in supporting family members. So if we can move on. Now, there's disadvantages. And I think every one of us who have tried to connect with family members would agree with this. It's hard to sell. It's hard to engage family members. That ambivalence seems to be as much for the person with the alcohol, drug, or gambling problem as it is for the family member. And no matter how much we advertise, services available, they tend to be underutilized. Posters, leaflets, they don't get that level of engagement. I'm going to tell a quick story because a number of years ago, we got funding that sadly was short term, and we were able to put for a time a dedicated family support service on the table in our part of Northern Ireland. And whenever it got started, we did a I thought it was an attractive leaflet, very informative, and it was distributed really widely. For the first 6 months, we sat with very few referrals. Why? The uptake of that support was, and so leaflets and posters alone isn't enough. Events, if we go on to put on events, they're usually poorly attended. And if we put something in the media, well, that once it goes into the broader media, we don't have editorial control. And I don't know if other parts of the world struggle with this. We certainly do. Short-term funding. You get funding for a couple of years to do something significant, even if it's really beneficial and you can show impact. If the funding's not there, it doesn't get rolled on, doesn't get mainstreamed. So initiatives tend to be sporadic. So there's some disadvantages. If you can move on, please, Mina. And the barriers. And I want to stop this, and maybe I'm going to ask a question. Is this universal? Because engaging family members can be really difficult. And there's some of the reasons respondents were telling me in those conversations: shame, stigma, embarrassment. It's to the fore. But if family members don't see the need for support in their own right, that's not their main goal. Their main goal is support the person with the problem. I'm okay. I'd be okay as long as you fix them. And if they're in recovery, the family member says, well, they're better now. I don't need support. The need for that crisis has passed. And the opposite could be a factor. What happens if treatment, which we often know relapse sadly is a common feature in alcohol, drug, and gambling work, people relapse. Well, does family members see that as failure? That could be an impact in them reaching out. If it's normalized, if the family member sees, well, this is just the way it is, they can't imagine any other reality, that could be a feature. Family members just worn out, exhausted. It takes a lot of energy to reach out for support. If I'm worn out, I'm less likely to do it. And this is something that I really, really needed to get my head around. The benefits of that support aren't as communicated as widely maybe as we need to. They don't necessarily see the benefits. And an important feature, the accessibility and visibility of services, specifically for family members, is challenging. The family members can't see that visibility of what support's out there. That could be challenging. And I want to stop here for a minute. In your part of the world, anybody see anything different, or is this similar? Is this common? It's certainly a feature in our part of the world, in Northern Ireland. And I'm going to stop for a second. Anybody see anything different or similar? Now, you got to be careful with digital, sessions. A 1.6 amount of 1.6 seconds of silence can be interpreted negatively. So yeah, there's a couple of people coming in with chat. Excellent.
Justina raised her hand. So
yeah, Georgina, you're seeing something similar. Throw it out there. Is this common worldwide? Is there anything I'm missing? Yeah, there's a. Yep, Germany's saying you see the same thing. Many of your raised now, particularly when there's children, people are terrified. There's going to be implications, and the removal of children, sadly, where there's risk, is worldwide. Italy, Germany, Finland. You're seeing similar things. Okay, I mean, if we could move on, please, because.
maybe you should give Justina some seconds to say something. I think she's always thinking of saying something, but
okay.
There is not enough space.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the chance to chip in. There's nothing on any of your slides that is different in Scotland. I've absolutely put a tick beside all of those. And we've recently issued some Ask the Family research, which found that on average, family members were affected by their loved one's substance use for 16 years, and it took an average of 8 years to reach support. And it's for all of the reasons that you're outlining in your slides, but kind of just that length of time. That was the first time we actually had a statistic around that. So it's quite, quite galling, really.
Justine, that it's disheartening, but it's great information, but it's still 18 years with an average of that length of time.
Yeah, 16 years and an average of 8 years. So basically half of that time. And we didn't even ask them, when did you reach the right support or when did you reach good support? We just said, when was the first time that you reached family support? And it was an average of 8 years. I'll put a link to our report in the chat there so people can see it.
Excellent. I'll be guaranteed to read that. Thank you. That's why I love these sessions. The sharing that could go on is powerful. Thank you. Any other comments? And thank you, gals. I get excited about stuff. I need to be told to shut up every now and again. So if we could move on, and Justine, this is where I really want to say thank you. The learning I had from some of the comments, particularly yours, was that consistency, availability support varies. If we could move on, I think that's really important. But the next slide, I think, was the real learning I took. Yeah. A focus group from Scotland, said something that really got me thinking. We're maybe very good if we do have services. We help people become more aware of them. So, we'll have posters and leaflets and that might just. But how do we help people move from that awareness to the thinking? Maybe this is useful for me. Add an affective element, an emotional feeling stage, and help move that to doing something about it. And maybe we could learn something from a whole marketing, point of view, because I think us in the health service we're not marketers, we're not advertisers. How we help see people, we're raising attention, but how do we help people move from that intention to action? It's worth thinking about. And if we can move on, because the diagram that your response gave me, Justine, was really, really useful. If we could move on to the next one, and I've included it here. So yes, on attention, we can make family members aware of what's on offer and how we help people be aware that their needs are important. But how do we create that interest? What are the benefits? And maybe that's not what we're communicating enough, that what family members have said, to us, that the benefits, what they have gotten from support. And that could move to desire, move on from the interest to desire. They develop a more favorable disposition. I like that way that's put, to support. That might just help them move to action. So we need to move beyond just making people more aware of the support and the issues. We need to create that interest. And maybe what we're a missing, a missing link in the chain is communicating that benefit of what family members are experiencing. Okay, if we can move on, that was real learning for me, and I was delighted to see that. Now, whenever we heard ways to connect with family members or reach, we heard a range of things: a model of practice, developing interventions, using written material, training and research, making contact, other maybe more creative ways, screening. I thought that was really interesting. Come back to that. But then what the title of today's talk was, using TV, multiple means, and the internet to connect with people. And there could have been ideas that people wanted to try. So I'm briefly going to talk about some of the things worldwide that I heard people were doing. So if we could move on to the next one, a model of good practice. Now, I stood back when Adrian Falkoff, who's a member of AFINet, and Adrian's work, an Australian psychiatrist, is developed the family model. This is aimed at mental health. But what he created was a very visible, you can see the diagram, I'm drawing it out in my head, but a very visible, simplistic overview, pictorial view of the model. And then, worldwide, not just through a book, but also through training, and there's an internet, link. And if anybody wants these slides, my email address is at the back and start of this. Feel free, and I'm happy to send the slides. We'll have the link, the family model. I thought that was really interesting. Now, I know when I was doing this, and I fell down, I did not follow this up and communicate this with Adrian, but Adrian said in his work, it is aimed mostly at mental health. Alcohol and drug misuse and gambling fits into that. But he said he hasn't broadened that to include. Maybe that's something worth thinking about, a very visible model. If we can move on. What I heard a really lot is in developing interventions, and worldwide, there were stacks of them in England using craft. Western Australia, I thought this was interesting, a statewide telephone service, but also using peer volunteers with lived experience, and people seem to really want that. Germany, training and promoting craft in certain centers. In Indonesia, an assessment of family members' needs followed by psychoeducational sessions. Norway, social network meetings to strengthen those relational bonds. Iran, they developed what they called the companion model. Well, that was really interesting. In the Republic of Ireland, they had systematic training of practitioners and trainers in delivering a 5-step method. Now, what that resulted was developing a sustainability of it, because by not only training people to deliver, but training people to be trainers, that meant they're that little bit more sustained. And in my neck of the woods in Northern Ireland, we moved, and I thought this was major movement. We moved that our commissioners have identified and have commissioned a dedicated range of services across the region to deliver family support, and we chose the 5-step method to train people. There has been an ongoing issue for us of how people are using that intervention with fidelity. So individually, interventions were pretty wide. If you could move on to the next, because these are interventions for adults, interventions for young people. In Germany, developing the trampoline intervention, which was a group program for young children 18 to 12, was really interesting. In our own world, we took the 5-step method, adapted it for young people, tested it and tried it, rolled it out. Again, we were hampered by short-term funding. And in other areas of England, they were exploring a group resource, for children. Sorry, I spelled resource wrong there. And please don't check my spelling. I'll have loads of typos in there. So, but one of the issues for children that we were very, very aware of, worldwide, there's a real lack of evidence-based interventions for young people. So, I think the work here is crucially important. If we can move on, because that's talking about interventions, information. Now, it would be, has anybody ever done this? Worldwide, gather the information that we use for family members. And in the UK, we're guided by NICE, National Institute of Clinical Excellence. And what they're telling us, if we're going to support family members, have written information we could use as a tool to talk to people about. That's their first step. The second, steer them toward self-help groups like Al-Anon. The third stage, quite interesting, then if they need more, steer them to dedicated services that could provide support, and that's delivering things like the 5-step method. What I've done over the years, a lot of information, it all sits on a couple of our websites. Taking a lid off, it sits on the AFINet website, is almost our standard practice when family members are involved. In Finland, a storybook that you developed, and there's a link there, for children to raise the issue. Rory in Scotland, always found that a really useful tool, because that's a little storybook to talk to kids about the, drink, and the message in Rory are really powerful. It's not your fault. It's okay to talk about it, and there is help out there. We developed in our part of Northern Ireland a small brief advice tool to get people to, particularly in our safeguarding practice, to explore with families, how does my drinking affect my kids? Because the amount of times people will say to social workers who are involved in risk and safeguarding issues, parents will say, "Oh, my kids are never affected." Well, and that's often a common perception or a common thing said. The reality is very different. So written material has its place. Worldwide, it'd be fascinating to look at the breadth of information. If you can move on, now training, I thought this was, again, interesting. There's back up in Scotland, training GPs. When they see low mood and anxiety, ask a question. Nigeria, I thought this was interesting, how training could help not only healthcare staff, but also law enforcement be more sensitized to the needs of family members. Back in England, training school staff. And in schools, so many young people, and Richard, this came out of your book, Risk and Resilience, for young people. How many kids or adults looking back in their childhood, the one person that really helped me was a teacher who understood. So there's training for teachers. Again, in our neck of the woods, we developed a resource for teachers, how they can become more aware, but how they could take those conversations forward. So training is an important part of the link. And let's not forget the massive work undertaken over these last lot of months of putting training of the 5-step method on the AFINet website. It's a way to reach family members by reaching practitioners that could deliver that. If we can move on, because I heard loads of ideas, but there's a few more. Research. A researcher doing their PhD was exploring with a focus group the potential of using the 5-step method. And she reached out to me, being an American living in Northern Ireland. Culturally, do you see some differences? And in America, things like codependency and enabling are to the fore in a lot of people's thinking. She is raising a question: how will a different approach that takes on a very theoretical difference be received? In England, using people's stories and communicating that is important. And in Nigeria, a national survey which has included the impact of harm. Let's get a picture. And that was the first time their study of drug use included the impact on other people. Excellent. Now, if we can move on, because we've moved to a load of resources, and that seemed quite structured and quite organized. What I heard in Scotland was maybe a slightly different approach. How do we make events and ways to engage that little bit more informal, but still attractive? So in Scottish families affected by alcohol and drugs, events, they're not related to substance misuse, but they have a chance to build relationships using things like activities, art therapy, yoga. In Glasgow, holistic therapies. It's a way to engage family members. And I like this, awareness-raising events, but with an interesting twist, connecting family events, not necessarily aimed specifically at the alcohol and drug issues, but how to help people connect with their communities, and family storytelling. Using their story that can be captured in film and audio and the written word that creates a voice. All very creative means to reach family members. So if we could move on, because we're maybe missing another opportunity. It's how we can use TV and multiple angles to reach family members. But before I do, in Germany, what I saw a systematic screening in primary care and motivating GPs to refer family members to treatment. Now, I am going back a lot of years ago at the Society for the Study of Addiction conference years ago when we were talking about the 5-step method. Somebody from America talked about a screening tool to ask about the needs of family members. That might be something that we're missing a chink, because you look at the audit questionnaire worldwide is the gold standard of how in primary care we can ask about alcohol, and they have the audit C, which is very simple, 3 questions. Do we have something similar for GPs? To ask those very important questions. Not just what are your problems, what's behind them. In Germany, I thought this was interesting. A TV program, right after its airing, 600 family members reached out for help. And in the Republic of Ireland, a nationally televised program on their national TV talked about the experience of family members, but where they could get help. And I like this in Italy. This is more into gambling. They used a whole range of multiple angle, billboards, place cards, placemats for canteens, websites, social media, radio, to communicate the call for information. And they had a service to support that need. Now, if we could move on, because maybe I'm missing the most logical response to this, the power of the internet and social media. Now, Mina, you were talking about some of the work in fragile childhood, and if you can go on to the next slide, because 2 of your YouTube clips, look at the views they have had. Monsters, 7,862,000 views. Now it's been on the table for 9 years. That is reaching a lot of people. And that message is what your children see, if you're drunk or high, is not what your kids say. And I thought even a more powerful, message that you did in 2014 that's had close to 900,000 views, Orphanage, where, children were, people were really challenged with the important question: if your kids could choose their parents, would they choose you? So the internet and YouTube develops and social media gives us a wealth of opportunity to reach people. Now, if we could move on, because over this last year, and Gallus, you were 100% right. COVID has created a world of opportunity. And in Germany, what I was really interested in, again, how we use multiple angles, short films, flyers, songs presented on YouTube to communicate a website that's available, KidKit. And we've already mentioned, the Fragile Childhood's, YouTube clips, but they use Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Now, I'm going to hold my hand up. People my age don't necessarily use Instagram and Snapchat. I do have a Facebook account that I never use. People do, but that world is forever changing. How we keep up with the most readily used. So if we can move on to one, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the work I've done over this last year, because I was very aware COVID has created not only a host of problems that our communities are facing worldwide, but also I think it created an opportunity. Now, what I did over this last year, I started because I was worried about people's mental health. I created 2 clips on dealing with worry and self-care that isn't aimed at necessarily an addiction or a family member population. It's right across our communities. But then, a pocket guide for family members, we did say that this in the when we talk about Project One, that might be a way to reach family members. So first off, a written bit of material, but then what I did was create a YouTube clip where I'm talking about it. Now, this is worth saying. These 5 clips have been roughly up about a year, and it cost 0 money, none. Now, they were done, I'm going to say on the cheap, but it cost no money, or just that, just the work of people involved. So 10,000 views with no cost involved. Now, the other thing I am going to say, I look at the quality of the clips, YouTube clips that Fragile Childhood did. They did cost a bit of money. I look at what I did, and maybe there's a difference of getting 4 million views of what you pay for, what I've gotten for nothing. But it's how you market it. It's how you make sure that they're available. And I am going to say this, particularly the Pocket Guide, if anybody's watching this that would like that, the written version of the little Pocket Guide in a Word document, it could be translated to your language. And I was delighted when folks from Italy reached out and asked for it. That offer's there. But also do these clips, and this is more important than just putting information out. From a practitioner's point of view, does it give us tools to use explore, offer, explore, that we use in the 5-step method, in a way to start a conversation? Make sure people are explored, they're ready for it, they want it, they're able for it. Offer it. Most important, it starts a conversation. How do you relate to that? What do you think about it? What a tool to start a conversation. Anybody who wants to use those YouTube clips, all you got to do is type my name into YouTube. They're there. Feel free to use them as much as you want. And let's start a conversation that, if they're useful in your part of the world, talk to me. Now, geez, I went to push a button to move on to the next slide. That's pure habit. The way forward, this is what people said they would like. If it was a wish list, how we make sure people are trained to deliver interventions. And that's why I was delighted to see the AFINet do an immense amount of work putting training resources on the 5-step method. There's one other thing worth mentioning, because it was years back, there was an online version of the 5-step method. And I think it's right thinking there's work being done with Turning Point. They're working on revisiting the availability of an online version of the intervention. And evidence said, back then when AFINet had that on the go, that the online version was effective, and correct me if I picked this up wrong, as face-to-face. People preferred face-to-face, but the online version was useful. Some people ask for residential breaks. That's going to cost money, but people, to be able to have that retreat away from their problems. Theme days in treatment services where we focus on the needs of family members. Having services talk together, that networking. We do that in our part of Northern Ireland quite regularly. How we get different avenues of services talking together. Family members want manageable strategies of how they can deal with important issues. And I think what we're learning, e-health has potential. How we use broadcast media to further this out. And I know Jim has often said this, how we can use drama and the arts to convey these messages. They're all viable. It's how we do it with consistency and regularity. So final couple of slides, and I'd like a discussion how we move forward with this. But going back to what Jim said in March, family members have no name and no common identity. And we could learn a lot from how other issues are shaped worldwide. We have, and I look at the amount of energy that goes into this in World Mental Health Day, World Suicide Day. Maybe something for family members might be worth considering. So if we could move on, that I came across, I don't know if anyone has heard of this, that on the 30th of September is International Recovery Day. Now, it was developed by John Winslow. I did not know who John Winslow was, but their overarching goal, you can read that, to globally connect recovery individuals, families, and communities with a message of hope. So I don't know, it's worth thinking about. Now, how you would call it was a positivity, with an atmosphere of positivity would be, I think, take some challenging thoughts. But some people can resonate, can communicate that hope, but also communicate the benefits family members will go back to what we learned through that marketing strategy. People can see the benefits. I'm just throwing it out as a thought. Is that something that would be beneficial? I had not heard of International Recovery Day, but it's there. So there's maybe a couple of thoughts worth thinking about. The themes that what we were trying to look at in how do we reach family members and build that level of support, how we challenge some of the negative, attitudes and stigma. And I don't know if anyone heard, it was over those last few weeks, The Wisdom of Trauma, a TV program developed that was really trying to change worldwide our view of trauma. For family members, we need to tackle some of the issues of attitudes and stigma. We need to think of ways to attract family members. That's going to benefit from increase our knowledge of how support benefits family members. They hear their voice, create that open space for them to talk, but how we skill up practitioners to have those conversations for both adults and children, young people. And the final thought worth mentioning, it's going back to one of our struggles is we don't have national policies. But in Australia, how a national policy emerged and was a direct result to them developing a parent and family drug support line. That came from a direct link between emerging policy and how we move into practice. So the two things are combined. Last couple of slides, and let's hear your thoughts that come from this. What's most encouraging? And when we know it's embedded in policy, and Project 2 for AFINet looked at worldwide how different countries embedded supporting family members in policy. How we developed the skills of the workforce, that was Project 3. And it's a personal opinion, but I like your views on this. When organizations have a dedicated focus to support family members, and I look at, in the Republic of Ireland, the Family Support Network, which is a voluntary organization. In Scotland, the Scottish Voices, if they're coming from the voluntary sector, how we work together. But it's when services have a dedicated, focus for family members, that seems when it really works well. But equally then how we embrace new and innovative ways to both reach and support family members. And I got to come back to the AFINet newsletter that comes out, because when I read that and look at how much that is growing, because the feedback that I got was a couple of years ago. If I look through the newsletters over the couple of years, that has immensely grown. So if we can move on, I think to the last slide, or almost, a quote that I was told from a family member, and this floored me. It's a direct quote. She said, "It took me a long time," and Justine, it's going back that if the average length of time for your families was 16 years, but that they were living with this stuff, but it took them 8 to reach out for help. She said a similar thing. It took me a long time to realize I needed help for myself. I was so preoccupied from fixing them that I was ignoring my needs. Posters, leaflets, they were there, but the message, I didn't hear the message. But she said, then one day the penny dropped, and I'm so glad it did. So what she said has really stuck with me. She said, keep getting your message out every way you can, drip, 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 because you never know when it's going to hit home. I'm hoping, I don't have all the answers of connecting family members or reaching family members. I heard some wonderful examples, but if we could finish up, I'm not sure if there's anything you found helpful. Anybody wants the slides, just drop me an email. I'm happy to share them because they do have some links. Justine, thank you very much for sharing your link. Excellent. think the big question, what did you hear that was helpful? The even bigger question is, what are we going to do next? And what are we going to do with it? So that leaves a few minutes for discussion, I hope.
So I suggest if anyone has got questions, just unmute yourselves or write down in the comment section. So first of all, thank you very much for that excellent talk. And maybe people might still think about what they would like to ask you. And maybe I just start with something I felt with all, you presented a lot of data, but I was just, you mentioned a bit of networking, and I just wonder, we know family members have got elevated depression rates and so on, and I just wonder if it wouldn't be necessary to move beyond the addiction field and not only to have a look at GPs, but also to have a look at all, say, churches, psychosocial institutions, whatever. If this might be another option to move the issue forward.
Yeah. Guys, I'd love to hear what other people think of what you just said. I can't agree more. That if we're always coming this from the addiction services angle, we're only coming at it from one component. We're missing so many others. Primary care, schools, churches, and mental health. Because if we look at the level, you live with any stressful situation, your levels of anxiety and low mood are likely to follow. So, I think what I heard you say is we need to get out of our silo thinking and think outside our world of influence into the others, because it's all connected. I'd love to hear what other people think of that, and how well have you done with that in other parts of the world?
Yeah, then Daniela wrote in the, Justina raised her hand again, but first of all, I'll read, Daniela wrote, how can we support family members to switch from caring for their addicted relative to caring for themselves? This is a very tough turning point for their engagement.
Ooh. That's a massive question. I don't have an easy answer for it. I'm hoping somebody else might. Maybe when I'll go back to when we can communicate the benefits the family members are seeing for help in their own right. I think if we got 100 family members and you ask them if we have different levels of intervention, some to get your family member in treatment, some to get you support in your own right, just picking up what you said, the vast majority of family members would sway, help me get help for them. How we help family members see the need for their support in their own right. Maybe the message there is the louder we can communicate the benefits of what family members can see from a qualitative point of view. What are some of the narratives that people are sharing with us that said, this is where I was, but this is where I am now? That's my thought. That might be a way forward, but I'm open to what other people think.
Okay, now it's Justina and also Anya who raised both their hands. So could you just turn your camera on and unmute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Just going back to what you were talking about before around addiction services, if everything's in addiction services, we're going to miss most people. And through the Scottish Families Helpline, part of the information we gather is about whether the person who uses substances is engaged with the treatment provider. And that's provided us with a really good argument around exactly that point, because if you're only putting family support in addiction services, you're going to miss most families. So if I look at the full year of, and I've not had time to work these out as percentages because I'm just looking at the raw figures here, but for 2020, 2021, is the person who uses substances engaged with a treatment provider? Yes, 259. No, 1,126. Intermittent attendance, 362. And then the rest were either not applicable or undisclosed. So, you know, there's just so few people who are engaged. And the other thing we ask is the family member or concerned significant other included in the person's treatment where they are in treatment? So for the whole of 2020, 21, is the family member included? Yes, 66. No, 276. Not in treatment, 685. And then again, the remainder not applicable. So it's such a mistake, I think, to only put things in addiction services, and it's the main barrier, I would say, in Scotland in terms of developing locally based family support is alcohol and drug partnerships, who are really the strategic commissioners are like, oh yeah, it's really, you know, we really care about families, things are terrible for families, but we don't have the money to pay for any services. It's not really our responsibility anyway. And they've got a bit of a point there, but nor is anybody else rushing forward, particularly for adult family members, to say, oh, that's our responsibility. You know, that's what we'll pay for. So yeah, definitely work in progress, that one, I think.
I think what you said, Justine, really always worries me. A lot of it does come down to money, and we're protective about, well, we're alcohol and drugs over here, we're mental health over here. We're not. It's how we help see the bigger picture. In Northern Ireland, our mental health strategy draft came out. There was hardly a mention of alcohol and drugs in it, let alone the needs of, you know, now there was a need for family members where they're struggling with mental health, not the impact of, you know, we just don't think outside the box. We commented on that. I'm waiting to see, do the strategy writers hear what we have to say about it? I wonder, there's a couple of thoughts that I'm going to say, and I'm just going to say it now. I wonder not only the YouTube clip for family members. I'm really keen, Justine, I'd be delighted to see if that could be helpful in Scotland and just to have those conversations. Other parts of the world, I'm keen to see, but also that one on self-care. I originally did it for healthcare staff. Now I'm even using it in addiction treatment to help people look at, you know, how do I heal from the ravages of alcohol and drugs, particularly in my neuro circuit systems. So if those clips give anybody any tools, and like I said, I'd be more than happy to share them. Not only the YouTube clips are out there, and sadly they're only in English, but the Word documents that people can translate.
Okay, so Anya.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I'm stuck a bit with the question how you can make family members see their own right for treatment. And I guess that, or I'm not sure if you can separate it completely, because the experience we made in the study BEPAS was that they really cared mainly for their addicted family member. And this is okay. It's okay to care for someone you love. And maybe it's something, if you combine it, that people can see, okay, there is something where I can have a form of action plan, what to do, how to cope. And this will help me too, and for people to experience that it's good to talk about it. Good to learn that there are many more people with the same problems, and then they can accept maybe better that they have their own right. I'm not sure, and I think it's a kind of social media campaign that people are more aware of, that there is help for the addicted family member, and that there is help for someone to talk to for themselves.
Yeah. You know what popped into my head as you were speaking, and maybe it's a simplistic, picture, but I'm thinking about the messages you get when you board an airplane, and they're giving you the instructions that if the cabin loses pressure, our mask will drop down. Make sure, even if you have your child with you, make sure you put your mask on first, because if you're not able to look after yourself, you're no good to anybody. And maybe that's a message, whoa, we could do for, and maybe you put another thought in my head. Maybe we need to say that outside the affected family member for alcohol and drugs and gambling. You could say that for any caring, role, whether it be dementia or learning disabilities, or, and maybe we need that. That's maybe where we can make that connection, that if you take on any element of, caring, you need to look after yourself. That might be worth thinking about.
Okay, so Richard also raised his hand.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. Lots and lots and lots of really important stuff there. Just one little thing you said about the fact you almost apologized that your YouTube videos were in English, and as near to English anyway as somebody from Pennsylvania can provide. But there is, of course, this wonderful thing on YouTube which you only just discovered, which is subtitles. So anybody in any can subtitle them in any language. And from what I've heard, the subtitles are quite good. So people can listen to your YouTube ones and just click on subtitles at the bottom and get subtitles in their own language. I'm not sure if it works for Finnish, because I heard recently that Finnish doesn't translate in almost any automatic one, but everything else probably does. So that's helpful. I think this thing about communicating the benefits is incredibly important. The issue that Daniela raised and that you've raised and others and Anya has raised, how do we help people to think more about the fact that they might get some benefit rather than only thinking about helping their person with the dependency problem stop. I think this thing about you can't help anyone else if you're not working properly yourself, if you're not okay yourself, is a very important message. And that's something perhaps we could do a lot more. But I mean, the benefits aren't only about that, because Anya said that the vast majority of people who come forward want to help their loved one. And I think in some circumstances that's true, but there's an awful lot of other people who actually couldn't care less about their so-called loved ones. They do feel that if only the person stopped drinking or taking drugs or gambling, life would get a lot better. But they don't see themselves in any way as carers, and don't want to be carers. So it's not so much that they want to care for, but they do think that the solution to their problem is if the person with the alcohol, drug or gambling problem would stop. And somehow we have to help people realize that they can help themselves, even if the other person doesn't change their behavior. They can have a much better quality of life, and it's how we do that I think is absolutely key. I think that the point that I think it was you raised, Ed, about whose responsibility is a really vital one, and I think that is the difficulty behind trying to think about getting a movement, because addiction. I know it was Justina who said it. Addiction services can rightly say, and people who fund addiction services can rightly say, well, actually, we are here to fund services of people with problems because of their own use of alcohol or drugs or gambling or whatever. We're not here to fund services for affected family members. We recognise that's an important group, but they're nothing to do with us. Now, increasingly, they're not saying that. Increasingly, they are saying that needs to be built into the Services Commission. But you can see their point if they did say that. But the problem is nobody has that as their responsibility. People have children as their responsibility. People have mental health problems as their responsibility. But people who are affected by, it doesn't have to be addiction problem, people who are affected by somebody else's cancer problem. There isn't an obvious responsible agency. And I think that's a problem for all of these groups who are affected by somebody else. There are a very large number of people who are affected by other people's behaviour or other people's problems or other people's illnesses, and they're largely told, go away until your problems become really serious. When you've developed a really bad mental health or physical health problem, then we'll offer you help because of this really bad mental or physical health problem, but we can't offer you help because of the thing that's causing the difficulties in the first place. I thought there were two things that you said that would be particularly exciting for us to take further. One of them is about the development of the universal screening tool. I think that the development of the audit changed the way people across the world have considered alcohol problems. One of the things we know for everything is that professionals won't touch something if they have no idea what to do with it. It's a really big issue. People will not ask questions if they don't know what to do with it. They don't know if they haven't even got a label for it. The audit gave people a task. It said, screen people and find out if they've got a problem, and if so, this is what you should do about it. Let's develop a brief intervention for people who've got people who score between X and Y. That told professionals that there was something they could do. It was amazing. And obviously not everyone uses the audit. It's not universal by any means, but the amount of coverage that people now have in terms of asking questions, all because of the development of a universal screening tool internationally, has been a massive increase. So that's something I think that we could really think about, and it's probably a fundable project that we could think about trying to develop. A universal screening tool for affected family members. The other thing that you mentioned, which is about developing a day, World Mental Health Day, World Suicide Day, well, whatever it is, it's a very interesting, that's become a very, dare I say, a very fashionable thing to do. And it's a good fashion to jump on. If we could, I mean, there is a World Children of Alcoholics Day, I think. So perhaps we need to think about something like a World AFINet Day, and that would be a very interesting thing. So thank you so much, Ed. So much food for thought.
I've also seen there are two comments, one from Daniela, which referred to the debate, I think, when Anya jumped in, that maybe relieving the affected family members from caring for their addicted relative might help. And I think Minna commented on Richard's statement that family members don't see themselves as carers, although apparently children of alcoholics, especially adult ones, they quite often do so. I just wanted to comment briefly on what Richard just said, because I think the interesting thing is that in Germany at last, there is support available for family members of people suffering from severe psychiatric disorders, as well as for family members suffering from dementia and chronic other chronic conditions. So I again believe that part of the barrier is specifically related to the stigma associated with addiction. So I think it's a real big issue. And talking about perspectives, I would again like to jump in what Anya brought up, which I think is there are no bad reasons for family members to seek help. If someone is seeking help, I don't know, to support change in the behavior of their loved ones, I think that's legitimate. But on the other hand, we're only helpful if we can point out, well, the final decision is not up to you, but we can have a look at what aspects might be helpful. And my clinical impression when I did craft was that quite often it was very hard to bring family members to the point to take care for themselves in the beginning. But after a while, for example, if they notice that behavior changes in them have little or no impact on their, I don't know, partner, parent, whoever suffered from addiction, then it became easier for them to say, well, I need to take care of myself. So I think it's a very complex issue. And I think most important, if we define ourselves as clinicians, our work is only good if it is perceived as helpful by our clients or by our family members. This is something we also would like to continue debating within AFINet. So this was more kind of a comment and not really a question, but
But useful one. There's been some wonderful comments and questions. I think it's food for thought that, what could we do? What are our next steps? So I will still invite, my email address was on the presentation. Anybody wants copies of the slides, just drop me an email. Happy to share them because they do have some links. Justine, thanks very much for you sharing your link to your study. As we were talking, I got that up on my computer, so I didn't lose it. I'd be really keen to look at that.
Just to say also, I'm going to be asking you for a copy of your slides anyway, because they go on the website alongside the video recording of this. That shouldn't stop people contacting you separately, but they'll be on the website as well.
Okay, wonderful. So I don't see any more questions or comments at the moment, and I see several people already had to leave. So again, thanks very much for your brilliant talk. And if there are any non-AFINet members still here, I would strongly recommend you to become a member because, for example, Ed's presentation will be available to AFINet members only. And I also would like to advertise that we'll have a rather short remote conference in September 9th and 10th, where you can see more information on the AFINet website, and you can still send in abstracts if you want to present anything. And our webinar series will now go into its well-deserved summer break. And then we'll be back in October and November, and we're planning to continue the series of webinars. And I'd also would like to recall that what Ed just presented is part of an AFINet project. And I think we're all looking forward to see also more activities by our members. So thanks a lot. And please tell your colleagues that they can see this session also on YouTube soon. And keep on spreading it. And I wish you all a nice and sunny afternoon and evening, and happy to see you again at the AFINet conference in September.